After 4 years of living off my money and sleeping under my roof, my husband and his mother thought they had won a $90 million lottery jackpot. That very same afternoon, she threw my custom designer luggage out of my own second-story window, screaming that they did not need my charity anymore and telling me to go die. I just stood on the manicured lawn of my estate, smiled up at them, and asked if they had bothered to read the name signed on the back of the ticket. My name is Zoe. I am 33 years old, and I work as a senior forensic accountant for one of the top financial firms in Atlanta. Before you hear how I mathematically and legally dismantled my toxic family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart people who mistook your kindness for weakness. The sound of shattering polycarbonate and tearing leather echoed through the affluent streets of Cascade Heights. I stood frozen on the cobblestone walkway of my own home, watching a cascade of my personal belongings rain down from the master bedroom balcony. A genuine leather tote bag hit the trunk of a nearby oak tree, bursting open and scattering my expensive silk blouses, tailored business suits, and delicate cosmetics across the perfectly edged green grass. The Georgia summer heat was already suffocating, but the chill that ran through my veins in that moment had absolutely nothing to do with the weather. Standing on the wrought iron balcony of the $1.5 million brownstone I had purchased solely with my own money years before my marriage was my mother-in-law, Brenda. At 58 years old, Brenda was the head choir director at a prominent local church, a woman who draped herself in Sunday morning righteousness while harboring a heart full of unadulterated venom. Beside her stood my husband, Darnell. At 35 years old, Darnell called himself a cryptocurrency investor and an entrepreneur. In reality, he had not generated a single dollar of legitimate income in 4 long years. He was wearing an expensive silk loungewear set that I had paid for, leaning against the balcony railing, with an arrogant smirk plastered across his face. In his right hand, he was aggressively waving a small, rectangular piece of paper. It was a Georgia state lottery ticket. "We do not need your miserable charity anymore," Brenda shrieked, her voice carrying an embarrassing volume that immediately began drawing the attention of my wealthy private neighbors. "You have held my son back for too long. You thought you could control him just because you pay the mortgage. You thought you could look down on us. Well, God has seen fit to deliver us from your oppressive spirit. My son is a multimillionaire now. Get off his property and go die alone." I did not scream back. I did not cry. As a forensic accountant, my entire professional life was built on analyzing data, identifying fraud, and maintaining absolute emotional detachment when dealing with hostile entities. I looked at the chaotic scene unfolding on my front lawn, not as a heartbreak, but as a severely compromised balance sheet that needed to be immediately liquidated. I slowly bent down and picked up a navy blue silk scarf from the grass, casually dusting off a few stray leaves. The audacity of their performance was truly staggering. 4 years ago, when Darnell and I first got married, he was supposedly on the verge of launching a major tech startup. I believed in his potential. I loved him. When his business partner allegedly absconded with their seed money, Darnell fell into a deep depression. I stepped up, paying off his outstanding debts and covering all our living expenses so he could focus on rebuilding his career. 2 years into our marriage, Brenda lost her modest apartment due to what she claimed was an unfair eviction. Playing the dutiful daughter-in-law, I allowed Brenda to move into the fully furnished guest suite on the first floor of my home. I told myself it would be temporary. Temporary quickly became permanent. Brenda treated my house like her personal kingdom and treated me like an unwelcome domestic worker. She constantly criticized my long working hours, suggesting that a real wife would spend more time catering to her husband's physical needs, rather than sitting behind a computer crunching numbers. She hosted lavish lunches for her church friends in my formal dining room, serving expensive catered food paid for entirely by my credit cards, while introducing me simply as Darnell's wife, never mentioning that I was the sole provider funding her extravagant new lifestyle. Darnell did absolutely nothing to defend me. He spent his days in the home office I had decorated for him, playing video games, trading worthless digital coins with my money, and agreeing with his mother that I was too controlling whenever I asked him to stick to a budget. Now the neighborhood spectacle was reaching its peak. Mr. Washington, a retired judge who lived 2 houses down, had stepped out onto his porch to watch the commotion. Several other neighbors were peering through their plantation shutters. Brenda noticed the growing audience and immediately amplified her theatrical performance, weaponizing her church persona for maximum public sympathy. "You see this, neighbors!" Brenda yelled, pointing a dramatically trembling finger down at me. "The Lord has spoken today." This woman tried to keep a good man down. She refused to let my son invest in his dreams. But God stepped in and blessed us with a $90 million jackpot. We are finally free from her financial abuse. Darnell puffed out his chest, stepping forward to lean over the balcony. He looked down at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. "Pack whatever garbage is left on this lawn and get out of my sight, Zoe. I am filing for divorce in the morning. I am taking the cars, I am keeping the house, and I am making sure you do not see a single dime of my winnings. You thought you were so smart with your corporate job and your spreadsheets. Look who the real winner is now. You are nothing to me." The sheer stupidity of his statement almost made me laugh out loud. Darnell had spent 4 years relying on my intelligence to keep a roof over his head, yet he fundamentally misunderstood how deeply my analytical nature governed every aspect of my life. He genuinely believed that securing a piece of printed paper suddenly made him the master of the universe. He had no idea the invisible, inescapable trap he had just walked blindly into. I took a deep breath of the humid summer air, looked directly up at my husband, and prepared to dismantle his illusion. I crossed my arms over my chest and looked up at the balcony, making sure my voice was loud, clear, and perfectly steady. "I have just one question for you, Darnell," I called out, cutting through the echoes of his mother's religious rambling. "Did you actually bother to read the name signed on the back of that ticket?" The silence that fell over the balcony was sudden and absolute. Darnell's triumphant smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. He slowly lowered his arm, bringing the lottery ticket closer to his face. Brenda stopped her theatrical waving and leaned in, squinting at the small rectangular slip. There, written clearly on the designated signature line in faded blue ink, was my name, Zoe. I had purchased that specific ticket 3 days ago at a local gas station while fueling up my car. As a professional who deals constantly with asset protection and fraud prevention, I never left anything to chance. The moment the cashier handed me the ticket, I signed the back of it. It was a deeply ingrained habit, a simple security measure that anyone with basic financial literacy should practice. Darnell must have found it sitting on my home office desk while rummaging through my personal workspace earlier that morning. He likely checked the numbers against the morning news broadcast, realized it was the jackpot winner, and immediately assumed he had hit the ultimate payday. For a moment, panic flashed across Brenda's face. She grabbed Darnell's arm, shaking it frantically. "What does she mean?" she hissed loudly enough for me to hear. "Why is her name on our blessing?" Darnell quickly recovered his composure, his arrogant smirk returning with twice the intensity. He let out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed across the lawn. "Nice try, Zoe," he yelled back. "You think I am stupid. We live in Georgia. I already Googled the laws this morning. Physical lottery tickets are bearer instruments. That means whoever holds the ticket claims the prize. Since we are married, any money you spent to buy this ticket came from marital funds. That makes this ticket joint property. I am your legal husband, which means I have full legal authority to just take a black marker, cross your little signature right out, and write my own name directly over it. The lottery commission will not care, as long as I am the one standing at the counter on Monday morning with my ID in hand." His profound ignorance of state financial regulations and basic property law was staggering. He was operating on a superficial Google search, entirely unaware of the intricate digital security protocols I had already triggered the night before. But I had no intention of educating him right then and there. Let him marinate in his false confidence. Let him dig his grave deeper. Brenda, completely reassured by her son's false legal expertise, regained her hostile momentum. "You heard him!" she screamed down at me. "The law is on our side. Now stop trespassing and get off this property before I call the police and have you dragged away in handcuffs like a common criminal." "Go ahead. I replied, maintaining my calm demeanor. Call them Brenda. I would love to have a chat with the local authorities. Brenda pulled her smartphone from her pocket, with dramatic flair dialing 911 right there on the balcony. She put the phone on speaker, ensuring her voice carried over the neighborhood. I have a hostile trespasser refusing to leave my son's estate, she cried into the phone, her voice thick with fake distress. She is acting erratic and threatening us. Please send officers immediately to Cascade Heights. We feel very unsafe. Less than 10 minutes later, the wail of sirens pierced the quiet neighborhood. Two Atlanta Police Department cruisers pulled sharply into the circular driveway. Officer Davis and Officer Ramirez stepped out, their hands resting cautiously on their duty belts as they assessed the situation. They looked at the expensive designer clothing strewn across the grass, then looked at me standing calmly by the oak tree, and finally looked up at Brenda and Darnell on the balcony. What seems to be the problem here? Officer Davis asked, his tone authoritative but calm. Brenda immediately rushed down the grand staircase and burst through the front door, pointing a shaking finger at me. Officers, thank the Lord you are here, she cried, putting on a masterful performance of a terrified elderly woman. This woman is my son's soon-to-be ex-wife. We just discovered we won the lottery and she went completely crazy. She is trying to steal our ticket and she refuses to vacate our property. I want her arrested for trespassing and harassment immediately. Officer Ramirez turned to me, pulling out a small notepad. Ma'am, is this true? Do you live here? Can I see some identification? I calmly retrieved my wallet from the one designer bag that had survived the fall. I handed Officer Ramirez my Georgia driver's license. Then I pulled out my phone, navigated to the Fulton County Property Tax Public Portal, and handed the phone to Officer Davis. Officers, I said politely. If you look at the county records displayed on my screen, you will see that this property is owned entirely by the Zoe Z Holdings Trust. I established this trust and purchased this home 2 years before I even met that man standing on the balcony. His name is nowhere on the mortgage. His name is nowhere on the deed. He does not contribute a single dollar to the property taxes or the upkeep. Legally, he is simply a guest in my home. And the woman screaming at you is a guest of a guest. Officer Davis scrutinized the digital documents carefully, comparing the name on the property tax record to my driver's license. He handed the phone back to me and turned to Brenda, his expression hardening. Ma'am, according to public records, this woman is the sole legal owner of this estate. She cannot be trespassing on her own property. Brenda's jaw dropped. She looked back at Darnell, who was slowly walking out the front door, suddenly looking much less confident. But my son is her husband, Brenda stammered. This is marital property. They share everything. Actually, Officer Ramirez interjected, pointing to the shattered luggage and ruined clothing scattered across the lawn. Did you throw these items from the balcony, ma'am? From? Brenda blinked, caught off guard by the shift in questioning. Well, yes, but she deserved it. We are 90 millionaires now. We do not need her cheap junk in our house. Officer Davis sighed, shaking his head. Ma'am, destroying someone else's personal property, especially items of high value, like these designer bags, constitutes felony destruction of property. We can arrest you right here, right now, and take you down to the precinct for booking. The color drained entirely from Brenda's face. The righteous church choir director persona vanished in an instant, replaced by sheer panic. Darnell stepped in front of his mother, holding his hands up defensively. Whoa, officers, let us not get crazy here. We are about to be extremely wealthy. We can buy her 100 new suitcases. We can buy this whole police department if we wanted to. There is no need for arrests. We are the victims here. I looked at the two officers, then looked at the pathetic mother and son duo trembling on my porch. A brilliant, highly calculated strategy formed in my mind. Having Brenda arrested for property damage would be a minor inconvenience for her. It would give her a story to twist and manipulate to her church friends, painting herself as a martyr oppressed by a cruel daughter-in-law. I needed a much more comprehensive destruction. I needed them to experience the full, devastating weight of financial ruin. Officers, I said, stepping forward with a perfectly composed smile. There is absolutely no need to arrest anyone today. Let them stay in the house. I will gladly pack a small overnight bag and check myself into the Four Seasons Hotel downtown for a few days to let tensions cool. Brenda and Darnell looked at me with deep confusion, clearly wondering why I was surrendering so easily. The police officers looked equally perplexed, but seemed relieved to avoid processing paperwork for a domestic dispute. I walked past Darnell, ignoring his presence completely, and grabbed a small intact duffel bag from the grass. I threw a few surviving items into it. I turned to look at my husband and his mother one last time. "Enjoy the house," I said softly. "Let us see exactly how long your $90 million feeds you when you cannot access a single dime." I walked to the driveway and climbed into my pristine black Range Rover. Before I pushed the start button, I opened the banking application on my phone. With 3 precise taps, I locked Darnell's supplementary platinum credit card. I froze the joint checking account that I exclusively funded. I canceled the premium grocery delivery service that Brenda used daily. Finally, I logged into the utility company portals and scheduled an immediate suspension of the premium cable and high-speed internet packages. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the neighborhood, watching in my rearview mirror as Darnell waved the lottery ticket in victory, completely unaware that his financial execution had just begun. The Four Seasons Hotel suite in Midtown Atlanta provided the perfect elevated sanctuary for my operation. I unpacked my laptop, synced it to my dual portable monitors, and established a secure encrypted connection to my personal servers. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the city skyline, but my eyes were locked strictly on the digital flow of data across my screens. As a forensic accountant, data is my love language. It tells a story that people tried desperately to hide. Right now, the data was telling me that my husband was panicking. Within 2 hours of my departure from the brownstone, the financial alerts started rolling in. Ping. Declined transaction at a high-end steakhouse in Buckhead for $400. Ping. Declined transaction at a luxury menswear boutique for $1,200. Ping. Declined Uber Black Ride. Darnell was quickly discovering that a piece of paper with numbers on it does not magically conjure liquid assets. He was $90 million rich in his deluded mind, but completely broke in reality. He had no cash, no active credit cards, and absolutely no financial literacy. By 3 in the afternoon, my security cameras back at the estate, which I still controlled via a hidden administrative account, showed a bright pink Dodge Charger pulling aggressively into my driveway. Out stepped Kendra. At 32 years old, my sister-in-law was a master manipulator who weaponized her status as a single mother to extract money from anyone foolish enough to listen to her sob stories. 3 years ago, I had foolishly loaned her $50,000 to open a luxury nail salon in Smyrna. I drew up a strict promissory note which she signed, promising to repay me with interest. She had not made a single payment in 28 months. The audio from my porch camera captured their conversation perfectly. Darnell was pacing back and forth, waving the lottery ticket. He explained his predicament. He needed cash immediately to celebrate, to show the world he had arrived, but the Georgia Lottery Commission had a standard processing period, and my financial blockade had left him destitute. Kendra, whose moral compass was non-existent, instantly proposed a solution that made me smile so widely my cheeks ached. She suggested they visit Big Mike. Big Mike was a notorious figure in certain unsavory circles of Southwest Atlanta. He operated a massive luxury car detailing business as a front, but everyone in the neighborhood knew his real wealth came from predatory lending. He was a loan shark who catered to desperate people expecting settlements, inheritances, or in this incredibly specific case, lottery payouts. He was also a man who did not tolerate being crossed. If you owed Big Mike money, you paid him back, or you lost things far more valuable than cash. Through a combination of location tracking on Darnell's phone, which I paid the bill for, and my own strategic network of informants in the city, I easily pieced together their movements. Darnell and Kendra drove to Big Mike's detailing shop. I could picture the scene perfectly. Darnell sweating through his designer clothes, slapping the winning ticket onto Big Mike's heavy metal desk. Big Mike, a shrewd man who survived by trusting nothing, would have pulled up the winning numbers on his own computer to verify the draw. He would have seen my faded signature on the back. Darnell undoubtedly fed him the same fabricated legal theory he had screamed at me from the balcony, claiming that as my husband, the ticket was marital property, and he had full authority to claim the prize. Big Mike did not care about family court nuances. He cared about leverage. A winning lottery ticket for $90 million was the ultimate collateral. Believing the standard 30-day payout wait was the only obstacle standing between Darnell and the jackpot, Big Mike agreed to front them the cash. The terms were brutally predatory, exactly what I would expect from a street-level financier. He handed Darnell a briefcase containing $500,000 in bundled cash and certified cashier's checks. In exchange, Big Mike kept the physical lottery ticket locked inside his heavy steel safe, and he attached a staggering 40% interest rate to the loan. Darnell had just mortgaged a fantasy for $500,000 of very real, very dangerous debt. I sat back in my plush hotel chair and took a sip of sparkling water. The sheer magnitude of their stupidity was breathtaking. They had just handed a stolen, digitally voided lottery ticket to a violent loan shark in exchange for cash they could never legally repay. The trap had not just been set. They had gleefully locked themselves inside it and swallowed the key. With $500,000 burning a hole in his pocket, Darnell did exactly what a man who had never earned a hard dollar in his life would do. He initiated a catastrophic shopping spree. The digital footprint of their indulgence was incredibly easy to track. Within an hour of leaving Big Mike's shop, Darnell and Kendra arrived at a premier Mercedes-Benz dealership in Buckhead. There is a specific kind of arrogance that accompanies unearned wealth, and they wore it like a cheap cologne. They purchased two brand-new Mercedes G-Wagons right off the showroom floor. One was matte black for Darnell, the other a striking pearl white for Kendra. They paid in full, using the certified checks from Big Mike. The sales associates, blinded by the massive commission, gladly overlooked the shady nature of the transaction. Darnell drove his new black tank straight to Phipps Plaza, the epicenter of luxury shopping in Atlanta. He had to appease the matriarch of this delusion. Brenda had undoubtedly been sitting in my house fuming over the canceled cable and locked grocery accounts. Darnell walked into a high-end jeweler and dropped $80,000 in cash on a massive, ostentatious diamond necklace. It was a gaudy, heavy piece that screamed new money. He brought it back to the brownstone and draped it around his mother's neck. My security cameras captured Brenda weeping tears of joy on my front porch, praising God for her son's generosity, completely oblivious to the fact that her new jewelry was funded by illegal street money that would soon demand blood as repayment. The sun began to set over the Atlanta skyline, casting long golden shadows across my hotel suite. The evening was just beginning for my husband and his accomplices. You cannot acquire $500,000 and two luxury vehicles without showing off to the city. Darnell booked the most exclusive VIP section at one of Atlanta's top nightclubs. It was a venue known for its exorbitant bottle service and strict door policy, a place where athletes and hip-hop moguls went to burn cash. I opened Instagram on a burner account I used for investigations. I did not even have to search hard. Kendra had been broadcasting their entire day on her public story. There was a video of her popping a bottle of expensive champagne against the tire of her white G-Wagon. There was a photo of Brenda wearing the diamond necklace, captioned with a Bible verse about God preparing a table in the presence of her enemies. And finally, there was the live stream from the nightclub. The video showed Darnell sitting on a white leather VIP sofa, surrounded by people who had ignored him just yesterday. He was ordering endless bottles of premium tequila, the kind that cost $3,000 each, carried out by waitresses holding sparkling sparklers. He was physically throwing stacks of $100 bills into the air, making it rain on the crowd below. He was shouting into the camera about how he was the king of the city, how he had finally secured his bag, how nobody could ever tell him what to do again. He looked directly into the lens, his eyes glazed with alcohol and unearned power, and yelled that he was leaving his broke past behind. I watched the footage on a loop, analyzing every frame. Every bottle popped, every dollar thrown, every designer item purchased was another nail in their collective coffin. They had blown through at least $300,000 in a single afternoon and night. The remaining $200,000 would barely last the week at this rate of hyperconsumption. They were living like billionaires on a loan shark's dime, entirely convinced that a piece of paper sitting in a criminal's safe was their golden parachute. I closed the social media application and pulled up the official Georgia State Lottery portal on my secondary monitor. I logged into my secure state-verified digital wallet. The screen loaded, displaying my biometric authentication status and my verified social security number. Right there in bold green text, the system displayed the status of the winning ticket I had scanned the night before. Status authenticated. Winner Zoe Z Holdings Trust. Payout pending standard verification. I reached for my glass of red wine, swirling the deep crimson liquid gently. In the state of Georgia, once a physical lottery ticket is scanned and tied to a verified digital identity, through the official state application, the paper ticket becomes completely void. It transforms into nothing more than a receipt. Darnell had handed Big Mike a worthless piece of trash. He had forged his name over my signature on a dead document. They were currently dancing on tables, bathing in expensive liquor, and praising the heavens for their sudden fortune. They felt invincible. They felt rich. They felt like they had finally defeated me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, letting the rich flavors settle on my palate. I was perfectly content to let them enjoy the weekend, let them drain the rest of Big Mike's money, let them dig the hole so incredibly deep that not even God himself could pull them out of it. The real work would begin on Monday morning. I had a mortgage fraud to expose, a nail salon to legally seize, and a beautiful, devastating reality check to deliver. The financial ruin loop was tightening its grip around their throats, and they were too busy choking on champagne to even feel it. The following morning brought the crisp chill of a late November Sunday. It was the week of Thanksgiving, a time when Atlanta's megachurches hosted their most elaborate community dinners. Brenda had belonged to the Greater Zion Fellowship for 2 decades. It was a sprawling, opulent sanctuary that seated 5,000 people, complete with high-definition broadcast screens and a professional lighting rig. For years, Brenda had lingered in the middle tiers of the church hierarchy, desperate for the social supremacy that came with being a top-tier donor. Today, fueled by Big Mike's predatory cash, she decided to buy her way to the top. Through my network, I learned that Brenda had sponsored the entire Thanksgiving banquet. She hired elite caterers, draped the fellowship hall in imported autumn floral arrangements, and positioned herself at the head table like royalty. Darnell and Kendra sat beside her, practically glowing with unearned arrogance. They had pulled up to the sanctuary in their brand-new unpaid-for G-Wagons, making sure every usher and deacon watched them step out. I dressed with meticulous care. I chose a tailored emerald green Alexander McQueen coat dress, sharp black stilettos, and carried a simple leather briefcase. Beside me was Marcus, my corporate litigator. Marcus was a shark in a Tom Ford suit, a man whose hourly rate matched the severity of his demeanor. We drove to Greater Zion in my Range Rover, arriving just as the main service concluded and the congregation transitioned into the extravagant banquet phase. We slipped into the back of the sanctuary, standing in the shadows of the massive mahogany double doors. The timing was impeccable. Pastor Higgins, a charismatic man with a booming baritone voice, had just called Brenda up to the pulpit. The giant high-definition screens flanking the altar projected her face to the thousands of seated guests. Brenda gripped the edges of the acrylic podium, wearing a custom silk suit and that ridiculous $80,000 diamond necklace. She looked out over the sea of faces, absorbing the spotlight she had craved her entire life. "Praise the Lord, saints!" Brenda began, her voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. "For years, my family walked through the valley. We faced trials, we faced tribulations, we faced the oppressive spirit of those who claimed to love us, but only sought to keep us in bondage." The congregation murmured their supportive agreements. Hallelujahs peppered the air. Brenda closed her eyes, placing a hand dramatically over her heart. "My son Darnell is a brilliant man," she continued, her voice rising in theatrical cadence. "He is a visionary, but he was chained to a woman who did not believe in his calling. A stingy, controlling, spiteful woman who worshipped her bank account more than she worshipped family. She restricted him. She humiliated us. She kicked us out of the very home we helped build with our love and prayers. A collective gasp swept through the front pews. I stood at the back perfectly still. Marcus adjusted his glasses, completely unfazed by the slander. "But God is a God of justice," Brenda shouted, raising her hands toward the vaulted ceiling. "He saw our tears. He saw my son's suffering. And just this week, the Lord liberated us. He blessed Darnell with a $90 million lottery jackpot. We are free from that toxic woman. And to show our gratitude to this house of worship, my son and I are pledging $50,000 to the church building fund today." The sanctuary erupted into a standing ovation. People leapt to their feet, clapping and cheering. Pastor Higgins approached the pulpit, a massive smile on his face, ready to embrace Brenda and claim the massive financial pledge. This was my cue. I pushed open the mahogany doors. The heavy wood groaned slightly, but it was my purposeful, echoing footsteps on the marble aisle that drew the attention of the ushers. Marcus walked half a step behind me, clutching the leather briefcase. As I walked down the center aisle, the congregation began to notice. The clapping slowly died down, rippling from the back rows to the front until a heavy, awkward silence blanketed the massive room. Brenda opened her eyes, looking down from the pulpit. The color drained from her face so fast, she looked physically ill. Darnell jumped up from his seat at the front table, pointing a shaking finger at me. "What are you doing here?" Darnell yelled, his voice cracking. "You are not welcome in this church. Security, get her out." I ignored him entirely. I kept my eyes locked on Pastor Higgins, who looked deeply confused by the sudden shift in atmosphere. I stopped right at the base of the altar, standing directly next to the polished brass offering plate that sat on a velvet stand. "Pastor Higgins," I said, my voice projecting clearly, without the need for a microphone. "My name is Zoe. I am the oppressive, stingy wife currently being slandered from your pulpit." The congregation let out a collective synchronized gasp. Cell phones were suddenly lifted into the air, recording every second of the confrontation. "I am not here to cause a scene." I continued, my tone remaining strictly professional and devoid of any emotional fluctuation. "I am here as a financial professional performing a fiduciary duty." I gestured to Marcus. He unlatched the briefcase and handed me a thick stack of printed receipts. They were the transaction logs I had pulled from Darnell's locked credit cards over the past 48 hours. Every single declined purchase at the steakhouse, the luxury boutiques, the high-end car washes, and the premium liquor stores. I held the stack of paper up for the front rows to see. Then I casually dropped the entire stack into the brass offering plate. The papers landed with a soft, dismissive thud. "Those are my husband's financial records from the past 2 days," I announced. Every single one of those transactions was declined due to insufficient funds. The man sitting at that table does not have $90 million. He does not even have 90 cents to his name. Brenda gripped the pulpit, her knuckles turning white. "You are a liar," she screamed, abandoning her pious tone completely. "You are just jealous that we took our ticket and left you in the dust. Pastor, do not listen to this bitter woman. We have the ticket." I walked slowly up the 3 carpeted steps to the altar. Pastor Higgins took a hesitant step back. I leaned in close to him, speaking directly into the microphone positioned on his lapel so the entire sanctuary could hear the devastating truth. "Pastor," I said softly, "the $50,000 Brenda just promised you does not exist in any legitimate bank account. The money funding this extravagant banquet, the money that bought those 2 vehicles parked outside, and the cash that paid for the diamond necklace currently resting on Brenda's chest, was borrowed from a violent loan shark in southwest Atlanta known as Big Mike." Big. The name Big Mike triggered immediate recognition among several deacons in the front rows. Whispers of horror ripped through the congregation. A church accepting money tied to local organized crime was a catastrophic scandal. Pastor Higgins turned pale, looking at Brenda in utter disbelief. "They handed a stolen, voided lottery ticket to a criminal as collateral." I continued, ensuring my voice remained crystal clear. "They are currently $500,000 in debt to a man who breaks legs for a living. If you accept a single penny from that woman, this church becomes an accessory to money laundering and fraud. My attorney, Marcus, has already drafted the necessary notices to the Internal Revenue Service and the local authorities." Brenda let out a feral, guttural scream. She grabbed the heavy crystal water pitcher resting on the podium. With a wild swing of her arm, she hurled the icy water directly at me. I did not flinch. I barely moved. The water splashed across the shoulder of my emerald coat dress, a few drops catching my cheek. I stood perfectly still, letting the cold water drip down my lapel. The entire church erupted into chaos. Ushers rushed the altar. Darnell tried to run up the steps to grab his mother, but tripped over his own expensive unpaid-for shoes. Kendra sat frozen at the table, hiding her face behind her hands. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a monogrammed silk handkerchief, and gently dabbed the water from my cheek. I looked at Brenda, who was hyperventilating, completely unraveled and stripped of all her fake religious dignity. I smirked. It was a cold, calculated expression of total victory. I adjusted my coat, turning my back on her without uttering another word. I walked down the altar steps, joined Marcus, and proceeded to march straight back up the center aisle. The congregation parted like the Red Sea, clearing a wide path for me. People stared in shock, awe, and unmistakable respect. As I reached the heavy mahogany doors, I heard Pastor Higgins urgently calling for the sound technicians to cut the microphones. The last thing I heard before stepping out into the crisp autumn air was the sound of Brenda sobbing hysterically, begging the church elders to believe her delusional lies. I climbed into the back of my Range Rover. Marcus slid into the passenger seat, opening his laptop to file the formal notices we had prepared. "They are going to panic now," Marcus said, not looking up from his screen. "Big Mike will hear about this before the sun goes down." "I know," I replied, wiping the last drop of water from my collar. "Desperate people make sloppy mistakes, and Darnell is about to make the biggest one of his life." The immediate aftermath of the Thanksgiving spectacle required total focus. I returned to the sanctuary of my Four Seasons suite, the adrenaline from the church confrontation giving way to cold, calculating resolve. It was time to switch from public executioner to forensic accountant. I booted up my laptop, secured my connection, and prepared to dive into the digital dirt. Darnell had proven himself to be arrogant and foolish, but I needed to know exactly how deep his deception ran. I had spent 4 years believing I was supporting a struggling entrepreneur, but the truth I suspected was far more sinister. My first target was the network traffic from my own brownstone. I had installed the enterprise-grade router myself, configuring it to log every device, every IP address, and every connection. I pulled the logs from the past 4 years, filtering specifically for Darnell's laptop and phone. As a forensic accountant, I am trained to look for patterns, anomalies, and hidden connections. What I found was a digital footprint that painted a picture of a man who was anything but unemployed. Darnell had not been spending his days playing video games or applying for jobs. He had been running a sophisticated cryptocurrency scam. I traced his connections to several offshore exchanges, mapping the flow of funds through a web of shell companies and digital wallets. He was operating a classic rug pull scheme, creating worthless digital tokens, hyping them up on obscure online forums, and then draining the liquidity pools once unsuspecting investors bought in. The sheer volume of transactions was staggering. He had moved hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 4 years, hiding the profits in decentralized wallets that were notoriously difficult to track. Yet he continued to live in my house, eat the food I bought, and use the credit cards I paid for, playing the role of the depressed, struggling husband to perfection. The anger I felt was sharp and precise. He had not just lied to me. He had used my home as a base of operations for federal financial crimes. He had weaponized my empathy to fund his criminal enterprise. But as I continued to dig, tracing the movement of his illicit funds, the anger morphed into a chilling realization. The crypto scam was just the surface layer. The true betrayal was hidden deeper within the financial records. I noticed a recurring pattern of large wire transfers, originating from a domestic bank account, tied to Darnell's name, an account I had never seen before. The transfers were substantial, tens of thousands of dollars at a time, moving consistently to a single recipient. I ran a skip trace on the recipient's account information. The name that populated on my screen made my blood run cold. Jasmine Carter. Jasmine was Kendra's best friend. She was a woman who frequently attended family gatherings, always offering me overly sweet compliments while shooting knowing glances at Darnell. I had always found her presence irritating, but I had never suspected the depth of her involvement in my husband's life. Darnell was funneling massive amounts of money to her, but the crypto scam, while lucrative, did not account for the sheer volume of cash he was transferring to Jasmine. The timeline did not align. The funds had to be coming from somewhere else. I shifted my focus from Darnell's crypto activities to my own personal financial records. I ran a comprehensive credit check on myself, pulling reports from all three major bureaus. As a forensic accountant, I monitor my credit regularly, but I had not done a deep dive in several months. The report loaded, and a glaring anomaly immediately caught my eye. There was a new active mortgage listed under my name, a secondary home equity line of credit taken out against my brownstone in Cascade Heights. The balance was $300,000. The breath caught in my throat. I had never authorized a secondary mortgage. I owned the home outright through my trust. I pulled the detailed documentation from the county clerk's online portal, downloading the digitized copies of the loan origination paperwork. I zoomed in on the signature line. There, stark against the white background, was my signature. Or rather, a near-perfect forgery of my signature. Darnell had forged my name. He had leveraged the equity in my home, the home I had purchased before I even met him, to secure a $300,000 loan. The timeline of the loan disbursement perfectly matched the initiation of the massive wire transfers to Jasmine Carter. He had stolen the equity from my home to fund a lavish lifestyle for his mistress, who just happened to be his sister's best friend. The betrayal was total. It was not just financial. It was a complete violation of trust orchestrated right under my nose. He had used my home to run a scam, used my credit to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars, and used my money to fund an affair with a woman who sat at my dining room table and smiled in my face. I did not break down. I did not cry. I meticulously documented every single wire transfer, every forged document, and every digital connection tying Darnell to the crypto scam and the fraudulent mortgage. I compiled the evidence into a secure, encrypted dossier. The trap I was building for Darnell and his family had just gained a terrifying new dimension. They thought they were facing a bitter ex-wife. They had no idea they were about to face a federal indictment. The following morning, I shifted my focus to the next target, Kendra. My sister-in-law had been gleefully participating in the destruction of my property and the celebration of their illusory wealth. She had eagerly accepted the loan shark money to expand her business, fully believing that the $90 million jackpot would cover her debts. It was time to remind Kendra who truly held the power in our financial relationship. 3 years ago, I had loaned Kendra $50,000 to open a luxury nail salon in Smyrna. I had done it against my better judgment, yielding to Darnell's incessant pleading. However, I had protected my investment. I forced Kendra to sign a strict, legally binding promissory note. The note stipulated that if she defaulted on the loan, I retained the right to seize the salon's assets to recover my funds. She had not made a single payment in 28 months. I contacted Marcus, my attorney, and sent him the original promissory note, along with the documentation of her default. Marcus moved with the speed and precision of a predator sensing blood in the water. Within hours, he had secured an emergency court order authorizing the immediate seizure of the salon's assets. We arrived at Kendra's salon at 2 in the afternoon. The timing was deliberate. It was peak business hours, and the salon was filled with high-end clients receiving expensive manicures and pedicures. Kendra was standing near the reception desk, directing her staff with the haughty arrogance of a woman who believed she was untouchable. I walked through the glass doors, Marcus following closely behind me. 2 Fulton County Sheriff's deputies flanked us, holding the official court order. The lively chatter in the salon died instantly as the deputies stepped inside. Kendra looked up, her expression morphing from irritation to shock. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "You cannot bring police into my business." I stood in the center of the salon, my posture relaxed, my voice calm and authoritative. "This is no longer your business, Kendra," I announced, projecting my voice so every client and employee could hear. "You have defaulted on the $50,000 loan I provided to open this establishment. As per the terms of our legally binding promissory note, I am executing a hostile takeover of these assets to recover my funds." Kendra's face turned crimson. She rushed forward, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "You are crazy. My brother is a multimillionaire. He is going to pay you your stupid $50,000 tomorrow." "Get out of my salon." Marcus stepped forward, handing a copy of the court order to Kendra. "He is not a multimillionaire, Ms. Henderson," Marcus stated flatly. "And this court order authorizes the immediate seizure of all property within these premises." The deputies moved forward, instructing the clients to finish their services and exit the building. The employees looked terrified, whispering among themselves. Kendra completely lost her composure. She lunged toward me, her hands curled into claws, screaming obscenities. She did not even make it halfway. The deputies intercepted her, restraining her arms and escorting her out the front doors. I stood in the newly seized salon, watching through the glass front as Kendra raged on the sidewalk. She was screaming into her phone, undoubtedly calling Darnell to demand he fix the situation with his non-existent millions. I smiled, a genuine expression of satisfaction. One piece of the puzzle had been dismantled. Two more remained. Later that evening, the reality of their situation began to set in for the Henderson family. Big Mike, the loan shark who had fronted them $500,000, was not a patient man. The money they had borrowed was gone, blown on luxury cars, jewelry, and VIP sections. Darnell was receiving threatening phone calls every hour. The pressure to cash the physical lottery ticket was mounting to a breaking point. I sat in my hotel suite, the city lights twinkling below me. I opened my laptop and logged back into the official Georgia State Lottery portal. The screen loaded and the status of my ticket was displayed in bold, undeniable green text. Status authenticated. Winner Zoe Z Holdings Trust. Payout pending standard verification. Darnell and Brenda were out of time, out of money, and out of options. They had to take the physical ticket to the lottery headquarters tomorrow morning. They had to try and claim the prize to save their lives from Big Mike. I closed my laptop, preparing myself for the final act. The financial ruin loop was complete. Tomorrow, the trap would snap shut. I closed my laptop, preparing myself for the final act. The financial ruin loop was complete. Tomorrow, the trap would snap shut. But desperate people rarely wait for tomorrow. Before I could even stand up to pour myself a glass of wine, the phone on my hotel suite desk began to ring. It was the concierge. His usually polished voice carried a distinct edge of alarm. He informed me that an irate woman claiming to be my sister-in-law was currently destroying the floral arrangements in the grand lobby and demanding my room number. Kendra had arrived. While I walked over to the security monitor panel, I thought about the sheer scale of Kendra's financial incompetence. When Marcus and I had executed the hostile takeover of her nail salon earlier that afternoon, I had finally gained access to her internal ledgers. The depths of her delusion were staggering. Believing that Darnell's lottery ticket made them invincible, Kendra had taken a massive chunk of the cash they borrowed from Big Mike and poured it into a reckless, lavish expansion of the salon. She had completely gutted the commercial space in Smyrna. The audit revealed invoices for imported leather massage chairs costing $8,000 each. She had installed a towering crystal chandelier in the waiting area, perfectly aligned with her newly acquired billionaire persona. She had even pre-ordered hundreds of jars of pure gold flake for a ridiculous $1,000 pedicure service. Kendra had literally mortgaged her life for crystal fixtures and gold dust. And because she had signed that promissory note with me 3 years ago, using the business assets as collateral, everything she purchased with Big Mike's money now legally belonged to my holding company. I had seized a freshly renovated luxury salon without spending a single dime of my own money. Now staring at the high-definition security feed provided by the Four Seasons, I watched the consequences of my hostile takeover play out in real time. Kendra was a portrait of complete unhinged desperation. She was wearing the same pearl-white designer outfit she had bought during their initial shopping spree, but it was now rumpled and stained. She was screaming at the front desk staff, wildly swinging a heavy leather handbag. The elegant atmosphere of the five-star hotel lobby was entirely shattered. The Four Seasons in Midtown Atlanta caters to visiting dignitaries, corporate billionaires, and elite athletes. Their security team operates with the quiet, ruthless efficiency of a private military contractor. I watched with immense satisfaction as 3 large men in impeccably tailored suits moved in on Kendra. They did not shout. They did not escalate. They simply formed an impenetrable human wall around her, effectively corralling her toward the glass exit doors. However, Kendra was fueled by the manic energy of a woman who knew a dangerous loan shark was actively hunting her family. In a sudden burst of panic, she ducked under the arm of the lead security director and bolted for the guest elevators. She managed to slip inside an open car just as the heavy brass doors slid shut, hitting the button for my floor. The concierge immediately called my suite again, advising me to lock my door and stay inside, while security intercepted her. I thanked him, hung up the phone, and did the exact opposite. I unlocked my heavy mahogany door and stepped out into the plush, silent corridor. I smoothed the lapels of my emerald silk robe, crossed my arms over my chest, and waited with absolute patience. The elevator chimed softly. The polished doors slid open, and Kendra lunged forward like a rabid animal. When she saw me standing calmly at the end of the hallway, her face contorted with pure rage. "You stole my business!" Kendra shrieked, her voice echoing violently against the expensive wall coverings. "You walked in there and humiliated me in front of the mayor's wife. You took my custom chairs. You took my equipment. My brother is a multimillionaire. He is going to buy this entire hotel and have you thrown out on the street. Give me back my keys right now." I did not take a single step backward. I looked at her with clinical detachment. "I did not steal anything, Kendra." I replied, my voice dangerously low and perfectly even. "I simply collected on a bad debt. You signed a legal contract. You completely defaulted. The fact that you chose to use stolen loan shark money to upgrade my newly acquired commercial assets was just a happy coincidence. I highly recommend you cancel those gold shipments immediately. Big Mike is going to need every single penny you can scrape together to pay off that massive interest rate." The direct mention of Big Mike broke whatever fragile tether to reality Kendra had left in her mind. She let out a guttural scream, raised her heavy designer handbag high above her head, and charged down the hallway to physically attack me. She never even made it within 10 feet of where I stood. The stairwell door burst open, and the elite hotel security team descended upon her with breathtaking, calculated precision. The lead officer caught her swinging arm, twisting it smoothly behind her back, while a second officer swept her legs out from under her in one fluid motion. Kendra hit the thick, patterned carpet with a muffled thud, instantly pinned securely to the floor. She thrashed and kicked her legs wildly, screaming terrible obscenities that echoed down the luxurious corridor, utterly destroying any remaining shred of her personal dignity. What Kendra did not realize in her blind fury was that her chaotic sprint through the lobby and her frantic elevator ride had attracted an audience. A prominent group of young social media influencers, staying on the floor directly below mine, had followed the commotion rapidly up the stairs. The emergency stairwell door was propped open, and no fewer than 5 smartphones were actively recording the entire miserable spectacle in glorious high-definition video. The cameras captured absolutely everything. They recorded Kendra pinned to the carpet, mascara running down her face, screaming hysterically about her $90 million brother and her stolen nail salon. They recorded the stark contrast of me standing a few feet away, perfectly poised and unbothered by her tantrum. In the modern age of digital media, a public meltdown inside a premier luxury hotel was absolute internet gold. Within an hour, the footage would be uploaded to TikTok and shared across every major Atlanta gossip blog. Kendra was actively losing her entire social standing, permanently cemented on the internet, as a screaming, unhinged laughingstock for the entire city to mock relentlessly. The Atlanta Police Department arrived shortly after responding to the hotel's urgent distress call. The officers recognized Kendra immediately from the description provided by the security team. They pulled her up from the floor, securing cold metal handcuffs tightly around her wrists. Kendra was openly sobbing now, the manic energy fully drained from her trembling body, swiftly replaced by the crushing weight of her current reality. She looked directly at me, her red eyes desperately pleading for a mercy she absolutely did not deserve from me. "Zoe, please help me." Kendra wept loudly, her voice cracking under the intense emotional strain. "Big Mike is going to hurt our family. Darnell does not have the liquid cash to pay him back until Monday morning. Please, you have to tell the bank to release the nail salon back to me. We are family, Zoe." I looked at the responding police officers, giving them a polite nod of gratitude for their prompt assistance. Then I looked slowly down at my pathetic sister-in-law. "We are not family, Kendra," I said, my tone devoid of a single ounce of human empathy. "We are simply a finalized financial transaction that has reached its logical conclusion. You bet your entire life on a stolen piece of paper. Now you have to pay the house." The officers hauled her toward the service elevator, her sobs echoing faintly as the metal doors closed shut. The hallway returned to its silent state. The young influencers lowered their recording phones, looking at me with profound respect. I gave them a polite smile, turned, and walked back into my suite. I locked the mahogany door and poured myself a fresh glass of wine. The nail salon was secured. Kendra was sitting handcuffed in a police cruiser. The loan shark was tightening his grip around Darnell and Brenda. The stage was perfectly set for tomorrow morning. I walked back over to my laptop screen, reviewing the final parameters of my trap. They were going to march into the lottery headquarters with news cameras, believing they were kings of the city. I set my alarm for 6 in the morning, pulled the heavy duvet over my shoulders, and fell into the most peaceful sleep of my entire life. The sharp melodic chime of my 6 o'clock alarm pierced the quiet luxury of my hotel suite. I opened my eyes feeling incredibly refreshed, completely devoid of the usual stress that had plagued my mornings for the last 4 years. Today was Monday. Today was execution day. I ordered a pot of black coffee from room service, tied my emerald silk robe tightly around my waist, and sat down at my digital command center. The dual monitors glowed with incoming data. Over the weekend, the financial hemorrhage had been catastrophic. I opened my custom tracking spreadsheet to perform a final autopsy on the $500,000 of loan shark money Darnell and his mother had so eagerly secured. The numbers were staggering in their pure, unadulterated stupidity. 2 Mercedes G-Wagons accounted for over $300,000. The massive diamond necklace Brenda refused to take off her neck drained another $80,000. The VIP nightclub sections, the premium liquor poured onto the floor, the designer wardrobes, and the extravagant Thanksgiving catering had vaporized the rest. In less than 48 hours, a $500,000 fortune had completely evaporated into thin air. They had burned through criminal money with the reckless abandon of toddlers given a limitless credit card in a toy store. They were mathematically, unequivocally broke. And they were sitting inside my brownstones, surrounded by expensive items they could not liquidate fast enough to save their own lives. I switched my monitor to the high-definition audio and video feed coming from the hidden security camera in my living room. The scene unfolding in my beautifully decorated house was a masterpiece of human panic. The morning sun streamed through the plantation shutters, illuminating a room thick with paranoia. Darnell was pacing back and forth across the hardwood floor, his hands pulling frantically at his hair. He was still wearing the same designer clothes from the day before, but they were wrinkled and smelled of stale alcohol and fear. Brenda was sitting on my custom velvet sofa, clutching a throw pillow to her chest. The $80,000 diamond necklace looked absurdly heavy around her neck, a glittering noose she had willingly put on. Her pristine church lady persona was entirely gone. Her makeup was smeared, and her eyes were darting nervously toward the front windows every time a car drove down the street. The reality of Kendra sitting in a jail cell, her nail salon legally seized and boarded up, had finally shattered their illusion of invincibility. "What are we going to do?" Brenda whimpered, rocking back and forth. "Kendra is calling from the precinct, crying for bail money. We do not have a single dollar left. My debit card was declined at the grocery store last night. Zoe blocked everything. We cannot even buy food." Darnell stopped pacing and aggressively kicked a heavy oak side table. "I will kill her," he shouted to the empty room. "I will absolutely destroy her. She planned this. She humiliated you at the church. She took my sister to jail, and she set us up. But it does not matter. It does not matter, because I have the ticket." He pulled the crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, holding it up like a holy relic. "This is $90 million, Mom. $90 million. We just have to go down to the lottery office right now, claim the cash, and this entire nightmare goes away. We can bail Kendra out by noon." Before Brenda could agree with his delusional plan, the sharp, jarring ringtone of Darnell's phone cut through the room. Darnell froze. He looked at the caller ID, and all the color drained from his face. His hand began to shake violently. He looked at his mother, his eyes wide with absolute terror. "It is him," Darnell whispered, his voice cracking. "It is Big Mike." "Answer it," Brenda hissed, her face contorting with panic. "Do not ignore him. You know what he does to people who ignore his calls. Put it on speaker. Let me hear what he is saying." Darnell swallowed hard, his thumb trembling as he swiped the screen and activated the speakerphone. He placed the phone gently on the coffee table as if it were an explosive device ready to detonate. "Yeah, Mike." "What is up, man?" Darnell said, trying and failing miserably to sound casual. The voice that came through the speaker was low, gravelly, and entirely devoid of human warmth. "Do not play games with me, Darnell," Big Mike said softly. "I saw the videos. The whole city saw the videos. Your crazy sister getting tackled by security at the Four Seasons. Your mother getting publicly humiliated at Greater Zion by the woman who actually owns your house. You told me you were a multimillionaire. You told me your wife was just a bitter ex trying to get a piece of your pie." "Mike, listen to me," Darnell pleaded, dropping to his knees beside the coffee table. "It is all a misunderstanding. Zoe is just playing dirty legal tricks. But I have the winning ticket right here in my hand. I am going to the lottery headquarters today. The money is guaranteed." "I do not care about your domestic drama," Big Mike interrupted, his tone turning dangerously sharp. "I care about my money. I gave you $500,000 in good faith. You took my money and you bought depreciating assets. You bought cars and shiny rocks instead of securing your foundation. My guys in Smyrna tell me your sister's salon just got seized by the county sheriff. That tells me your collateral is compromised." "It is not compromised," Brenda shouted toward the phone, unable to control her panic. "We are getting the payout today. We will give you your money back with the 40% interest by this afternoon. Just give us a few hours." "Listen to me very carefully, church lady," Big Mike growled. "The streets are talking. Word is, your daughter-in-law froze all your accounts. You do not have the liquidity to even buy a tank of gas. I am not waiting 30 days for a lottery commission background check. I am not waiting a week. You owe me $700,000 with interest. I want my money by 5 o'clock today. If I do not have my cash in hand by sunset, I am sending my crew to that fancy brownstone. We are taking the G-Wagons, we are taking the jewelry, and then we are going to start breaking bones until the balance is settled. Do not test me, Darnell. I will turn your life into a horror movie." The line went dead with a sharp click. Darnell collapsed backward onto the rug, gasping for air. Brenda burst into loud, racking sobs. The paranoia had fully set in. Every shadow outside the window looked like a debt collector. Every passing car sounded like Big Mike's enforcement crew. The luxurious estate I had built for myself had become their personal panic room. They had no choice anymore. The luxury of waiting 30 days to claim the ticket quietly was gone. The option to consult with financial advisors or tax attorneys was gone. The intense pressure to cash in immediately was suffocating them. They had to walk into the Georgia State Lottery headquarters today, present the physical ticket, and demand an emergency cash advance against the total payout to save their own lives. "We have to go right now," Darnell said, scrambling to his feet and grabbing his keys. "We have to drive down there and make them give us the money. I will beg the lottery director if I have to. I will show them the threats." "No, we are not begging," Brenda said, her voice suddenly turning sharp and venomous. She wiped the tears from her face, her massive ego overriding her absolute terror. "If we go down there begging, Zoe wins. The church thinks we are broke. The neighborhood thinks we are criminals. We are not walking into that headquarters like victims. We are walking in there like royalty. We are going to make it a spectacle. We are going to prove to everyone in Atlanta that we are exactly who we say we are." Darnell looked at his mother as if she had lost her mind. "Mom, Big Mike is going to kill us. We do not have time for a spectacle." "We are doing it my way," Brenda commanded, standing up and straightening her rumpled silk suit. "I am going to call the local news stations. I am going to tell them the winners of the $90 million jackpot are coming to claim their prize. We will rent limousines on credit. We will show the entire city that your wife is a lying, jealous snake. Once the cameras are rolling, the Lottery Commission will have to process our claim immediately to look good for the press. They will write us a check on the spot. It was the most astoundingly stupid, narcissistic plan I had ever heard in my entire career as a forensic accountant. They were literally calling the media to document their own execution. They were so blinded by their desperation to save face and prove me wrong that they were willing to walk directly into the spotlight with a forged, voided document. I sat back in my hotel suite and smiled a smile so cold it could have frozen water. The ultimate trap was fully primed, and my prey was eagerly marching toward the bait. I turned my attention to the secondary monitor. I opened the official Georgia State Lottery application. I logged in using my dual-factor authentication. The encrypted dashboard loaded smoothly. There, glowing brightly on the screen, was the definitive proof of their impending doom. Winner authenticated Zoe Z Holdings Trust. Status verified and locked. When I purchased the ticket and realized I possessed the winning numbers, I did not just sign the back of the physical paper. As a financial professional, I knew the physical ticket was the most vulnerable point of failure. The Georgia Lottery allows winners to digitally secure their tickets through their official state application. On the night of the drawing, while Darnell was asleep down the hall, I had scanned the unique barcode on the front of the ticket using my phone. I linked it directly to my social security number, my biometric facial recognition, and my legally established trust account. By doing so, I had permanently digitized the asset. The physical ticket Darnell was holding was entirely void. It was effectively a canceled check. It had zero monetary value. It was nothing more than a piece of recycled cardboard with a forged signature written in Sharpie. I closed my laptop and slid it into my leather briefcase. I walked into the massive marble bathroom of my suite to prepare for the final showdown. I selected a stunning tailored crimson power suit. I wanted to look sharp, vibrant, and completely untouchable. I applied a bold red lipstick, perfectly matching the aesthetic of a woman who was about to inherit the world while watching her enemies burn. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus, my attorney. The media has been tipped off by your mother-in-law. They are gathering at the headquarters now. The trap is set. I will meet you at the VIP entrance in 30 minutes. I texted him back a simple confirmation. Acknowledged. See you soon. I slipped my phone into my designer handbag, grabbed my briefcase, and walked out of the hotel suite. Darnell and Brenda wanted a media spectacle. They wanted the cameras flashing. They wanted the entire city of Atlanta to watch them claim their victory. I was more than happy to give them exactly what they asked for. I stepped into the waiting elevator, the doors sliding shut smoothly. The ride down to the lobby felt victorious. Big Mike was waiting for his money. The police were waiting for a forgery suspect. And I was waiting to claim my $90 million. The financial ruin loop was about to reach its glorious televised conclusion. The morning sun baked the downtown Atlanta pavement as I sat comfortably in the climate-controlled rear passenger seat of a tinted black Escalade. My corporate attorney Sterling sat beside me, quietly reviewing the verified digital claims documents on his encrypted tablet. We were parked directly across the street from the Georgia State Lottery headquarters. My eyes were fixed on the heavy glass entrance doors, waiting for the absolute height of human delusion to arrive. Brenda and Darnell had decided that simply walking into a government building to claim their stolen fortune was not enough. They needed validation. They needed an audience to witness their supposed triumph over the woman who had funded their existence for the past 4 years. Through my network of informants and a quick scan of social media tags, I knew exactly what they had orchestrated. They had rented a fleet of 3 stretch Hummer limousines to transport themselves and their parasitic entourage from my brownstone in Cascade Heights to the downtown plaza. How a family completely frozen out of their banking accounts managed to secure 3 luxury vehicles was a testament to the dangerous power of a lie. Darnell had undoubtedly flashed the physical lottery ticket at the transportation company dispatcher, promising to pay them 5 times the standard rental rate by sunset. The dispatchers, blinded by the prospect of a massive tip from a newly minted multimillionaire, had eagerly agreed to front the service. Darnell was stacking unauthorized debt on top of predatory loan shark cash. He was digging a financial grave so wide and so deep that the sheer volume of his liabilities was becoming comical. At exactly 10:45 in the morning, the ridiculous convoy turned the corner onto the bustling city street. The three oversized, glaringly white stretch limousines pulled up aggressively to the loading zone directly in front of the lottery headquarters, illegally blocking traffic and drawing the immediate irritation of passing commuters. They wanted a grand entrance. Grand. And they were willing to violate city parking ordinances to achieve it. The doors of the lead limousine swung open and the visual assault began. Darnell stepped out onto the concrete pavement, first looking like a caricature of a wealthy music mogul. He was wearing a custom-tailored bright crimson suit that clashed violently with the mid-morning business atmosphere. The suit still had the stiff, uncreased look of a garment purchased just hours before on a frantic shopping spree. He adjusted his collar with exaggerated arrogance, his eyes hidden behind oversized diamond-encrusted sunglasses. Brenda emerged next, and her outfit defied all boundaries of logical taste. She had dressed herself for a royal coronation rather than a bureaucratic government appointment. She was draped in a massive floor-length white fur coat, an incredibly absurd choice for a warm autumn day in Georgia. The giant, $80,000 diamond necklace she had purchased with Big Mike's illicit street money rested heavily on her chest, catching the sunlight and flashing blinding reflections across the plaza. She topped the entire ensemble with an enormous, wide-brimmed white church hat that completely obscured the upper half of her face. The remaining two limousines emptied out, depositing a loud, chaotic entourage onto the sidewalk. Brenda had packed the vehicles with the most vocal, gossipy members of her church choir, several distant cousins who had miraculously reappeared upon hearing the news of the jackpot, and a handful of Darnell's shady associates from his failed crypto scam days. They were a cheering squad hired on the promise of future payouts, clapping and shouting Darnell's name as if he were a returning war hero. But the limousines and the loud entourage were only the backdrop for the main event. Brenda had spent her early morning aggressively calling the tip lines for every major local news affiliate in the metropolitan Atlanta area. She had pitched them a sensational human interest story. She promised the news directors an exclusive first-hand look at a devout, community-focused church leader and her brilliantly innovative son, claiming the largest state jackpot of the year. The local media, always hungry for a feel-good story featuring sudden wealth and emotional displays, had taken the bait hook, line, and sinker. 3 news vans equipped with satellite dishes were already parked on the plaza. Reporters from Channel 2, Action News, and Fox 5 Atlanta stood near the entrance, holding microphones and adjusting their earpieces as their camera operators angled their heavy lenses toward the arriving limousines. As Darnell and Brenda paraded up the concrete walkway, the reporters surged forward, creating a tight semicircle of flashing cameras and extended microphones. The spectacle was everything Brenda had desperately craved. She finally had her audience. She finally had the validation she believed she was owed by the universe. Darnell puffed out his chest, throwing a heavy arm around his mother's fur-covered shoulders. He raised his free hand, holding the physical lottery ticket tightly between his fingers, carefully ensuring his thumb covered the bottom signature line where my name was faintly written. The camera flashes reflected off his sunglasses as he basked in the unearned glory. "How does it feel, Mr. Henderson?" a female reporter asked, thrusting a microphone toward Darnell's face. "How does it feel to wake up holding $90 million? Darnell smiled a bright, predatory smile. "It feels like destiny," he declared, his voice dripping with rehearsed confidence. "I have been grinding for years as an entrepreneur, building my crypto portfolio, staying focused on the hustle. People doubted me. People tried to hold me down. But God rewards the faithful. We are going to take this money, build an empire, and reinvest in the Atlanta community. We are unstoppable now." Brenda could not let her son monopolize the broadcast. She pushed her way to the front of the microphones, her massive white hat tilting dramatically as she addressed the cameras. "This is a testament to the power of prayer," Brenda preached, slipping effortlessly into her Sunday morning choir director persona. "For years we suffered under the roof of an incredibly oppressive spirit. We were tied to someone who did not understand the value of family, someone who valued her corporate spreadsheets more than she valued human compassion. I sat in the back of my Escalade watching the live broadcast stream directly on my tablet." Sterling let out a low whistle of disbelief. "She is literally defaming you on live television." He observed his legal mind automatically calculating the damages. "Let her speak," I replied. My eyes locked on the screen. The higher she climbs her pedestal, the harder gravity will pull her down. "Give her enough rope, Sterling. She is tying her own noose perfectly." Brenda continued her televised sermon, her voice rising in theatrical cadence. "We were living with a miserly outsider, a woman who tried to clip my son's wings because she was intimidated by his greatness. She thought she could control us with her money, but the Lord stepped in and broke those chains. We are stepping into our season of generational wealth, and we are finally leaving the dead weight behind. We do not need her charity. We do not need her house. We have the ultimate blessing right here in our hands." The crowd of choir members and distant cousins erupted into loud applause, shouting their agreements and praising Brenda's speech. Darnell nodded vigorously, playing the role of the liberated, triumphant victim to absolute perfection. Behind their arrogant smiles and religious posturing, I knew the absolute terror that was quietly eating them alive from the inside out. Darnell's tailored suit could not hide the slight frantic tremble in his fingers. Brenda's loud preaching could not mask the desperate, wide-eyed panic hiding beneath the brim of her massive hat. They knew the clock was ticking. Big Mike's deadline of 5 o'clock was looming like a guillotine over their heads. They had spent $500,000 of violent street money in a span of 48 hours. They had seized Kendra's nail salon, alienated the police, and trashed my property. They were completely cornered, entirely reliant on a piece of paper that was fundamentally worthless. They were putting on a show for the cameras to convince themselves just as much as they were trying to convince the city. They needed to believe they were rich because the alternative was a violent, bloody reckoning at the hands of a ruthless loan shark. "Thank you," Atlanta Darnell shouted to the cameras, waving the ticket one last time for the press photographers. "We are heading inside right now to secure the bag. Watch the news tonight. The Henderson Empire is officially open for business." The reporters shouted a few final questions, but Darnell and Brenda turned their backs to the press. Flanked by their cheering entourage, they marched confidently up the wide concrete steps and pushed through the heavy glass double doors of the Georgia State Lottery headquarters. The news crews lingered outside, filming the exterior of the building, preparing their afternoon segments about the local family who had struck it rich. I turned off the live stream on my tablet and placed it neatly into my leather briefcase. The public relations phase of their delusion was officially over. The brutal, unforgiving reality of state financial law was waiting for them just beyond those glass doors. I looked at Sterling, giving him a curt, precise nod. It is time I stated, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "Let us go introduce them to the real world." My driver shifted the Escalade into gear, pulling smoothly across the street to the secure VIP entrance, located at the side of the headquarters building. While Darnell and Brenda were marching through the public lobby, expecting to be greeted with confetti and a giant ceremonial check, I was entering through a private secured access point reserved exclusively for verified, pre-authenticated winners. The absolute peak of their delusion had been broadcast to the entire city. They had publicly claimed ownership of stolen assets. They had insulted my name on local television. They had paraded their fraudulent ticket in front of state officials. The trap was no longer just set. The steel jaws were actively snapping shut. I stepped out of the vehicle, straightened the lapels of my crimson power suit, and walked into the building. The ultimate financial execution was ready to commence. The public lobby of the Georgia State Lottery headquarters was a sprawling cavern of polished terrazzo floors, bright fluorescent lighting, and massive glass partitions. It was an environment designed to process the daily influx of hopeful dreamers and occasional winners with bureaucratic efficiency. From my vantage point behind the tinted, soundproof glass of the VIP Winners Lounge, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the main claims counter. I stood with my arms crossed over my crimson power suit, my posture rigid and commanding, while my attorney Sterling stood silently beside me. We watched the high-definition security feeds on the wall monitors, tracking the targets as they marched into the building. Darnell and Brenda burst through the heavy glass double doors with the chaotic energy of a conquering army. They were flanked by their loud cheering entourage of church choir members and shady associates, all of whom were completely intoxicated by the illusion of proximity to vast wealth. Darnell led the charge. His bright crimson suit was already showing sweat stains under the harsh overhead lights, a physical manifestation of the sheer panic hiding beneath his arrogant strut. He was walking with an exaggerated swagger, his chest puffed out, attempting to project the image of a seasoned billionaire. Brenda was right on his heels, her massive white fur coat swishing dramatically with every step. The $80,000 diamond necklace catching the fluorescent lights and throwing aggressive, blinding reflections across the government lobby. They bypassed the standard waiting area entirely. Darnell marched straight up to the primary claims counter, ignoring the velvet ropes and the stanchions designed to maintain orderly lines. He slapped his hand down on the polished marble surface with a loud, aggressive smack. The noise echoed through the lobby, drawing the irritated attention of the security guards stationed by the metal detectors. Darnell removed his diamond-encrusted sunglasses with a theatrical flourish and stared down at the senior claims clerk sitting behind the bulletproof glass partition. The clerk was a seasoned state employee, a woman in her late 50s, with tired eyes and a name tag that read Beatrice. She had processed thousands of claims and had seen every variation of human excitement and desperation. She looked at Darnell with mild, practiced indifference. "I am here to claim my $90 million, Darnell announced, his voice booming so loudly that the news crews setting up their equipment outside could likely hear him through the glass. He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out the crumpled, physically worn lottery ticket, and slapped it face down onto the stainless steel transaction tray. He intentionally kept the back of the ticket, hidden the side where he had desperately scribbled his name in thick black marker, directly over my faded, elegant signature. "Process it quickly. We have a massive celebration waiting for us, and I need the initial cash advance transferred to my accounts immediately." Beatrice did not react to his commanding tone. She calmly reached into the transaction tray and retrieved the ticket. She adjusted her reading glasses, turning the piece of paper over in her hands. She examined the front, verifying the draw date and the printed numbers. Then she turned it over to the back. I watched the security feed closely, zooming in on Beatrice's face. I saw her eyes narrow fractionally. I saw her thumb brush over the thick, messy black ink that Darnell had used to cross out my name. She did not say a word about the obvious defacement. State employees at her level are rigorously trained in fraud prevention protocols. They are taught never to alert a suspect that they have identified a discrepancy. "I need your state-issued identification and your social security card, sir," Beatrice stated, her voice entirely monotone. Darnell confidently tossed his Georgia driver's license and his social security card into the tray. Brenda leaned against the counter next to him, fanning herself with a church program, loudly declaring to the surrounding lobby that the Lord had finally delivered them to the promised land. Beatrice took Darnell's identification documents and turned toward her computer terminal. This was the moment, the apex of the financial ruin loop. Beatrice picked up the handheld optical barcode scanner. She aligned the red laser with the unique serial barcode printed at the bottom of the lottery ticket. She pulled the trigger. A sharp electronic beep echoed through the quiet space behind the glass partition. I watched Beatrice's computer monitor via the mirrored security feed in my VIP lounge. The standard green validation screen did not appear. Instead, the entire interface flashed a violent, blinding red. A massive warning prompt dominated the center of her screen. The system had instantly flagged the physical document. Beatrice maintained her perfectly neutral expression. She did not gasp. She did not look at Darnell. She simply moved her hand under the edge of her desk and pressed the silent, specialized panic button wired directly to the director's office and the state trooper barracks located in the basement of the building. "It is going to be just a few minutes," Sir Beatrice said, turning back to Darnell with a polite, artificial smile. "Our system requires a secondary verification for jackpots of this magnitude." Darnell scoffed, leaning heavily against the glass. "Take your time," he said, turning to wink at his entourage. "When you are worth 90 million, you can afford to wait a few minutes." Brenda loudly agreed, raising her hands in the air to praise God for their monumental patience. They stood there basking in the artificial glory of their impending wealth, completely oblivious to the digital guillotine that had just been released above their necks. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. Darnell's arrogant smile began to falter. The sweat stains under his arms grew larger. He started tapping his expensive unpaid-for shoes against the terrazzo floor. The realization that Big Mike's 5 o'clock deadline was rapidly approaching began to gnaw at his manufactured confidence. "What is taking so long?" Darnell finally snapped, slamming his fist against the marble counter again. "You scanned the ticket. The numbers match. Print the authorization forms and authorize the wire transfer. I have important business to attend to." Before Beatrice could offer another placating excuse, the heavy, reinforced security doors located to the left of the claims counter clicked open. The sound of heavy, synchronized footsteps echoed across the lobby. Out stepped Gregory Vance, the executive director of the Georgia State Lottery Commission. He was a tall, imposing man with an immaculate suit and a deeply serious expression. He was not smiling. He carried a leather folder tucked under his left arm. Flanking him on either side were two massive, fully armed Georgia State troopers. The troopers moved with purposeful, intimidating aggression, their hands resting naturally near their holstered firearms. They fanned out, forming a tactical perimeter around Darnell and Brenda, effectively cutting off any potential path of escape. The loud cheering entourage behind Darnell instantly fell completely silent. The sudden appearance of armed state police officers completely shattered the celebratory atmosphere. Brenda lowered her hands, the religious praises dying in her throat, as she stared at the troopers in sheer, unadulterated terror. Darnell took a step back from the counter, his eyes darting frantically between Director Vance and the uniformed officers. "What is this?" Darnell demanded, his voice cracking, entirely devoid of the booming authority he had projected just moments before. "Why are there cops here? I am here to claim my legal winnings. I am a multimillionaire." Director Vance stopped directly in front of Darnell, separated only by the glass partition. He opened his leather folder and looked down at the documents inside. He did not look at Darnell with respect. He looked at him with the cold, clinical disdain reserved for incredibly stupid criminals. "Mr. Henderson," Director Vance began, his voice projecting clearly across the silent lobby. "We have a severe irregularity regarding the ticket you have just presented to my clerk." "There is no irregularity," Brenda shouted desperately, trying to salvage the situation. "We bought that ticket. Those are our numbers. We are the rightful winners. Give my son his money." Director Vance ignored Brenda entirely, keeping his steely gaze locked on Darnell. "Mr. Henderson, this ticket was digitally claimed and authenticated via the official Georgia State Lottery application using the purchaser's verified Social Security number and biometric data at 11:30 post-meridiem on the exact night of the drawing." Darnell's jaw dropped open. He looked as though the oxygen had been violently sucked out of his lungs. He stumbled backward, shaking his head in frantic denial. No, that is impossible. I have the ticket right here. It is a bearer instrument. It is marital property. I crossed her name out. It belongs to me." Director Vance closed his leather folder with a sharp, definitive snap that echoed like a gunshot. "The digital authentication permanently logged in our state database supersedes any physical document," he stated, delivering the absolute crushing reality check. "The moment that ticket was scanned into the verified digital wallet, the physical paper you are holding became completely legally void. Furthermore, Mr. Henderson, the voided physical ticket you are holding was officially reported stolen by the legal owner over 48 hours ago. You have just attempted to claim a state fortune using stolen, invalidated property." The heavy, frosted glass doors of the VIP Winners Lounge slid open with a smooth electronic hum. The timing was orchestrated to absolute perfection. Just as Director Vance delivered the devastating revelation regarding the stolen ticket, I stepped out of the shadows and into the glaring fluorescent light of the public lobby. I was not walking with the chaotic, desperate energy of a fraudster. I walked with the slow, deliberate, terrifying grace of an apex predator who had just successfully cornered her prey. In my hands, I held the ultimate symbol of their destruction. It was the oversized ceremonial presentation check provided by the State Lottery Commission. The glossy cardboard gleamed under the overhead lights. Printed in massive, bold, undeniable black ink across the center of the board was the amount of $90 million. And printed clearly on the payee line was my designated financial entity, Zoe Z Holdings Trust. Darnell and Brenda turned their heads simultaneously, their eyes locking onto the massive ceremonial check I was carrying. The physical shock that hit their bodies was spectacular to witness. Darnell's knees physically buckled, forcing him to grab the edge of the marble claims counter to prevent himself from collapsing onto the floor. Brenda let out a high-pitched, strangled gasp, bringing both hands to her face as if she were trying to physically push the horrific reality away from her vision. I stopped a few feet away from the state troopers, positioning myself perfectly, so the local news cameras stationed outside the glass entrance doors had a clear, unobstructed line of sight to my arrival. I wanted every reporter, every camera operator, and every single viewer sitting in their living rooms across Atlanta to witness this exact moment. "Hello, Darnell," I said, my voice dripping with cold, aristocratic malice. "I told you to look at the name on the back of the ticket. I highly recommend paying closer attention to financial documents before you attempt to steal them from a forensic accountant." Darnell stammered, his eyes wide with a mixture of profound betrayal and blinding terror. "You set us up. You let us take the ticket. Let us—" "You knew it was worthless the whole time." "I did not set you up, Darnell," I replied smoothly, shifting the weight of the massive check so the cameras could get a better angle of the $90 million figure. "I simply allowed your own unchecked greed and astounding arrogance to guide your actions. You set yourself up the moment you decided to steal a piece of paper off my desk and parade it around my property like a conquering king." Brenda finally found her voice. The righteous preaching choir director persona was entirely obliterated. She looked like a desperate, terrified woman who had just realized she was standing in front of an oncoming train. "Zoe, please." Brenda begged, tears of genuine panic streaming down her face, ruining her carefully applied makeup. "You cannot do this to us. Big Mike is going to kill us. We owe him $500,000. We bought cars. We bought jewelry. We need this money, Zoe. We are family. You have to tell the director to give us the cash." I looked at the giant $80,000 diamond necklace resting on her chest, then looked directly into her terrified eyes. "We are not family, Brenda. We are simply a finalized financial transaction that has reached its logical conclusion. You told me to pack my garbage and go die alone. I believe your exact words were that you did not need my miserable charity anymore." "Well, congratulations, you are officially entirely independent." I turned my attention away from the trembling mother and focused entirely on the local news cameras pressing against the exterior glass doors. I raised my voice, ensuring my explanation of the legal mechanics was recorded clearly for the evening broadcast. I wanted the entire city to understand exactly how I had dismantled my abusive husband. "In the state of Georgia," I announced, projecting my voice with absolute authority, "the Lottery Commission employs advanced digital security protocols for high-value assets. The moment a winning ticket is scanned into a verified biometric digital wallet, the physical paper copy is immediately rendered null and void. It becomes nothing more than a receipt. The legal ownership is permanently transferred to the digital database." I turned back to look at Darnell, who was shaking violently, sweat pouring down his face, staining his crimson suit. "Therefore, the piece of paper my soon-to-be ex-husband just presented to the claims counter is completely worthless." However, he did not just present a worthless piece of paper. He took a black marker and aggressively crossed out my legal signature on the back of that document, attempting to overwrite it with his own name to claim a state-funded prize. I looked at Director Vance, giving him a professional nod. Director Vance nodded back, stepping aside as the two armed state troopers moved aggressively toward Darnell. "In the state of Georgia," I continued, my voice sharp and cutting like a surgical scalpel, "intentionally altering, defacing, or forging a signature on a state financial instrument with the intent to defraud the government constitutes felony forgery in the first degree. It is a severe criminal offense, carrying a mandatory minimum prison sentence. My husband did not just attempt to steal my money. He committed a major federal felony on camera inside a government building right in front of the executive director of the Lottery Commission. Darnell let out a loud, pathetic sob. He backed away from the counter, his hands raised in surrender. "No, wait please," he cried, his voice echoing frantically through the lobby. "I did not know the law. I thought it was marital property. I did not mean to commit forgery. Zoe, tell them I did not mean it. Tell them to let me go. I will give you the house. I will give you everything. Just do not let them arrest me. Big Mike is going to kill me if I go to jail. Ignorance of the law is not a valid legal defense." Mr. Henderson, one of the state troopers, barked, grabbing Darnell roughly by the shoulder and spinning him around. The trooper forced Darnell's hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic ratcheting sound of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely into place echoed loudly across the terrazzo floor. It was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. "You have the right to remain silent," the second trooper stated, beginning the standard Miranda warning as they aggressively patted down his expensive unpaid-for clothing. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Seeing her son physically restrained in steel handcuffs completely broke Brenda's mind. The reality of their situation crashed down upon her with the force of a collapsing building. She was 58 years old, holding $500,000 of loan shark debt, wearing stolen jewelry, and watching her only son being dragged away to a state penitentiary. She let out a horrific, ear-piercing scream that shattered the bureaucratic silence of the lobby. "Lord Jesus, help us!" Brenda shrieked, throwing her hands into the air. She collapsed entirely, her knees giving out beneath her. She hit the polished terrazzo floor hard, her massive white fur coat splaying out around her like a puddle of dirty snow. Her wide-brimmed church hat tumbled off her head, rolling pathetically across the floor. She slammed her fists against the marble tiles, sobbing hysterically, screaming for mercy, screaming for God to intervene and save them from the hellfire they had eagerly marched themselves into. The entourage of church members and shady friends who had accompanied them in the limousines immediately began backing away toward the exit doors. They wanted absolutely no association with a man being arrested for federal forgery or a woman having a violent psychological breakdown on the floor of a government building. They abandoned Brenda exactly where she lay, fleeing the building to avoid the incoming media storm. I stood perfectly still in my immaculate crimson suit, clutching my $90 million ceremonial check. I looked down at Brenda thrashing on the floor, weeping in pure, unadulterated agony. I looked at Darnell crying pathetically as the state troopers marched him roughly toward the security doors leading to the holding cells in the basement. I did not feel an ounce of pity. I did not feel an ounce of remorse. I felt only the supreme calculating satisfaction of a perfectly balanced ledger. They had demanded a public spectacle. They had demanded to be recognized as royalty. Now the cameras outside were furiously recording Darnell being hauled away in steel chains and Brenda writhing on the ground in utter disgrace. I turned away from this pathetic display. I handed the oversized check to Sterling, adjusted the lapels of my jacket, and walked calmly back toward the VIP lounge. The immediate threat of Darnell and his forgery had been neutralized by the state. But my work was not entirely finished. The police had handled the criminal aspect of their delusion. It was now time for me to handle the financial execution. Big Mike was waiting for his money, and I had a mortgage fraud case to expose. The final act of this glorious retribution was just beginning. The pristine silence of my hotel suite was a stark contrast to the absolute chaos I knew was unfolding across the city. Darnell was sitting in a holding cell, stripped of his crimson suit and his delusional bravado. Brenda had somehow managed to scrape herself off the terrazzo floor of the lottery headquarters, fleeing the flashing cameras of the local news crews. She retreated to the only place she thought was safe: my brownstone in Cascade Heights. Kendra had apparently been released on a meager bail funded by the absolute last pennies they could scrape together, and had joined her mother in hiding behind my heavy oak doors. They were locked inside my property, shivering in the dark because I had suspended the utilities, waiting for a miracle that was never going to arrive. But miracles do not visit those who build their kingdoms on stolen foundation. Instead, they were about to receive a visit from a much less forgiving entity. The clock on my laptop screen flipped to 5 o'clock in the evening. The deadline had officially arrived. Big Mike was not a man who respected the concept of a grace period. I switched my monitor back to the high-definition security feed overlooking my driveway. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long, ominous shadows across the manicured lawn. The two brand-new unpaid-for Mercedes G-Wagons sat gleaming in the driveway monuments to their catastrophic stupidity. At exactly 5:15, the silence of the affluent neighborhood was shattered by the deep, aggressive rumble of heavy diesel engines. A convoy of three matte black pickup trucks turned sharply onto my street, followed closely by a massive industrial flatbed tow truck. They did not pull up politely. They swerved violently into my driveway, the heavy tires tearing deep, muddy trenches into the pristine grass I paid thousands of dollars a year to maintain. Four massive men stepped out of the trucks. These were Big Mike's enforcers, men who communicated exclusively through physical violence and intimidation. They moved with a terrifying efficiency. Two men walked directly to the G-Wagons. They did not bother looking for the keys. One of the enforcers raised a heavy steel crowbar and smashed it directly through the driver's side window of Darnell's vehicle. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the quiet neighborhood, completely ignoring the horrified stares of the wealthy residents next door. They attached heavy steel chains to the front axles of both luxury vehicles, hooking them securely to the winch of the waiting flatbed. Inside the brownstone, my cameras showed Brenda and Kendra cowering behind the kitchen island. Brenda was hyperventilating, clutching the diamond necklace around her throat. Kendra was sobbing, her hands shaking violently. The lead enforcer, a towering man with a thick beard and a heavy leather jacket, marched up the front steps of my home. He did not ring the doorbell. He did not knock. He lifted a massive steel-toed boot and kicked the heavy mahogany front door right near the lock. The wood splintered, but the reinforced deadbolt I had installed held firm. He kicked it a second time, the force rattling the entire frame. "Open this door right now!" The enforcer roared, his voice booming like thunder across the manicured lawn. "Big Mike wants his money, and he wants it 5 minutes ago. Open the door before we pull this entire house down around your ears." Brenda let out a terrified shriek. She scrambled backward, slipping on the hardwood floor. Kendra covered her ears, weeping hysterically. The enforcer kicked the door a third time, the wood groaning under the immense pressure. Recognizing that the reinforced door would take too much time to breach, the enforcer changed his tactic. He walked over to the floor-to-ceiling living room window, raised a heavy steel baton and smashed it through the double-paned glass. The window exploded inward, sending shards of sharp glass raining down onto my custom velvet sofa. The enforcer reached through the jagged opening and stepped into my living room. Two other men followed him inside, their boots crunching over the broken glass. Brenda and Kendra screamed in pure terror, scrambling backward into the kitchen. "Where is the cash?" the lead enforcer demanded, stalking toward them. "Your idiot son owes my boss $700,000. He told us he had a $90 million ticket. My boss just watched the evening news. He watched your boy get hauled away in handcuffs for forgery. The ticket was a fake. The money is gone. Now we are collecting the collateral. Please," Brenda begged, falling to her knees. "We do not have the money. My son lied to us. Please do not hurt us." The enforcer laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that chilled the room. "God is not collecting this debt, lady. Big Mike is." And Big Mike said, "To strip you down to the bone." He stepped forward, grabbing Kendra by the arm and shoving her aside effortlessly. She crashed into the stainless steel refrigerator, sliding to the floor in a weeping heap. The enforcer towered over Brenda. His eyes locked onto the massive glittering diamond necklace resting heavily against her chest. "Nice rocks," he grunted, reaching down with a massive hand. "No, please, that is mine." Brenda sobbed instinctively, bringing her hands up to protect the jewelry. "It is a family heirloom." The enforcer did not hesitate. He grabbed the thick platinum chain tightly in his fist. With one violent, aggressive yank, he ripped the $80,000 necklace directly off her throat. The heavy clasp snapped. The metal dug sharply into her skin, leaving a bright red, angry welt across her neck. Brenda gasped in physical pain, collapsing forward onto the hardwood floor, sobbing uncontrollably as the enforcer shoved the expensive jewelry deep into the pocket of his leather jacket. Grab anything else that shines. The lead enforcer barked to his men. Take the electronics. Take the artwork. Strip this place clean. We are taking the cars and we are taking everything else of value. Tell Big Mike we got the down payment on the debt. And tell these women that if the rest of the cash is not delivered by Friday, we are coming back and we will not be looking for jewelry next time. The men spent 10 minutes violently tearing through my home. They ripped televisions off the walls and smashed display cabinets to grab designer watches. Brenda and Kendra stayed huddled in the corner, absolutely paralyzed by fear, watching the violent dismantling of their brief empire. When the men finally walked out, stepping back through the shattered living room window, the house was left in utter ruins. Outside, the tow truck roared to life, hauling the two luxury Mercedes G-Wagons away down the street, dragging the tires aggressively over the pavement. The heavy diesel trucks followed, leaving a profound, terrifying silence in their wake. Brenda remained on the kitchen floor for a long time. Her neck was bleeding slightly from where the necklace had been brutally torn away. Her massive ego, her church director pride, her unearned arrogance, everything had been violently stripped from her. She was a broken, desperate woman sitting in the dark of a house she did not own, hunted by ruthless criminals she could not pay. Slowly, she pulled out her smartphone. Sitting in my hotel suite, I watched her dial. A moment later, my cell phone began to ring. The caller ID flashed Brenda's name. I let it ring 3 times, savoring the desperation. On the 4th ring, I accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a word. I simply listened to the heavy, ragged breathing on the other end of the line. "Zoe, please," Brenda whispered, her voice choking on thick, wet sobs. "Please, help us. I know we were wrong. I know Darnell was wrong, but we are family. The Lord commands us to forgive. We are terrified, Zoe. Those men took everything. They hurt me. They are threatening to come back and kill us. You have $90 million. You are a wealthy woman now. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. Have mercy on us. Send the money to pay them off. Do it for the family bond we share. I will do anything you want. I will apologize to the whole church. Just save us." I listened to her pathetic pleas. She was still trying to weaponize religion and use familial guilt to extract my resources. She was waiting for a lifeline, praying for a savior to descend and wipe away her horrific debts. I took a deep breath, relishing the glorious silence of my suite. I did not offer a single syllable of comfort. I simply pressed the red button on my mobile phone and hung up, severing the connection and plunging her back into absolute terrifying darkness. The morning after Big Mike delivered his violent brand of street justice to my property, I woke up with the absolute clarity of a woman ready to deliver the final financial blow. I drank a single cup of espresso, dressed in a sharp charcoal gray suit, and walked out to the hotel lobby. Marcus was waiting for me near the valet station. Standing beside him was Chief Inspector Reynolds from the Financial Crimes Division of the Atlanta Police Department, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers. I had sent Reynolds my complete encrypted dossier on Darnell's mortgage fraud and cryptocurrency scam the previous evening. Law enforcement moves incredibly fast when a forensic accountant hands them a perfectly packaged, indisputable evidence file of federal crimes. We drove to Cascade Heights in a disciplined convoy. My Range Rover led the way, followed by Marcus in his sedan and the police cruiser bringing up the rear. As we turned onto my street and pulled up to my estate, the destruction from the previous evening was glaringly obvious. The deep tire trenches ruined my manicured lawn. The shattered living room window gaped open like a jagged wound. The mahogany front door was splintered and hanging awkwardly on its hinges. The 2 luxury vehicles were gone, leaving only empty space and leaked oil on the driveway. I stepped out of my vehicle, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. I did not mourn the physical damage to my property. Glass can be replaced, wood can be repaired. The total eradication of my toxic in-laws was worth every penny of the repair costs. I led the group up the front steps and pushed the broken door open. The interior of the house was a disaster zone. Smashed electronics, overturned furniture, and broken glass littered the hardwood floors. Sitting in the center of the devastated living room, shivering in the morning chill, were Brenda and Kendra. They looked like refugees from a war they had started and spectacularly lost. Brenda was wrapped in a torn blanket, the red welt on her neck glaringly visible where the diamond necklace had been ripped away. Kendra sat beside her, staring blankly at the floor, the arrogant nail salon owner reduced to an empty shell. When Brenda heard our footsteps, she looked up. Her bloodshot eyes widened with a sudden desperate surge of hope when she saw me walking through the door. She ignored the uniformed officers and the chief inspector entirely. "Zoe!" Brenda cried out, her voice raspy and weak. She scrambled to her feet, pulling the blanket tight around her shoulders. "You came back. You brought the police to protect us. Big Mike's men destroyed everything, but you are here to fix it. Tell them we have the lottery money. Tell them to arrest those animals." I stopped a few feet away from her, my expression completely impassive. "I did not bring the police to protect you, Brenda," I said, my voice cutting through the chilly air of the living room. "I brought the police because my husband is currently sitting in a holding cell for felony forgery, and I needed to provide the authorities with the rest of his criminal portfolio." Brenda froze, the fragile hope shattering instantly in her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, backing away slowly. Marcus stepped forward, opening his leather briefcase and extracting a thick stack of legal documents. He handed a copy to Chief Inspector Reynolds, who began reviewing the pages with clinical precision. While Darnell was busy playing the role of a depressed, unemployed husband for the past 4 years, I continued, my voice steady and commanding. He was actually quite active. "I spent my weekend conducting a comprehensive forensic audit of his digital footprint and our property records. Darnell did not just forge a lottery ticket yesterday. He has been forging documents for months." Kendra looked up from the floor, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Forging what documents?" she asked, her voice trembling. I turned my gaze to my pathetic sister-in-law. 3 months ago, I explained, walking slowly around the shattered coffee table. Darnell forged my signature to take out a $300,000 home equity line of credit against this exact property. He stole the equity from my home, the home I purchased independently before the marriage. He bypassed the notary requirements by using a fraudulent digital stamp and routed the funds into a hidden domestic bank account. Brenda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. $300,000, she repeated in shock. "He never told me about that money. Where is it?" "That is the most fascinating part of the audit," I replied, offering a cold, calculated smile. "The money did not go to his crypto scams. The money did not go to you, Brenda. The money went to fund a very lavish lifestyle for a woman named Jasmine Carter." Kendra's eyes widened in absolute horror. "Jasmine," she choked out, her voice rising in pitch. "My best friend Jasmine. Darnell was giving the money to Jasmine." "Yes, Kendra," I stated flatly. "Your brother stole $300,000 from his wife to fund an extensive affair with your best friend. But Darnell is not a very smart criminal. He knew he could not wire large sums of money directly to Jasmine without triggering suspicious activity reports at the bank. He needed a conduit. He needed a pass-through account to wash the funds and obscure the origin." I pointed a sharp, perfectly manicured finger directly at Kendra's face. "He needed you." Kendra scrambled backward on the floor, shaking her head frantically. No, I did not know anything about stolen money." "I swear, Zoe. Darnell just asked me to receive some wire transfers for his business and pass them along to Jasmine because she was helping him with marketing. I did not know he forged your signature. I did not know they were having an affair. I am innocent." Chief Inspector Reynolds stepped forward, closing the legal folder. "Ignorance of the origin of illicit funds is not a defense against money laundering, Ms. Henderson," he stated with heavy governmental authority. "Your bank accounts were actively utilized to structure and layer stolen funds derived from mortgage fraud. You facilitated the concealment of stolen assets. That makes you a direct accessory to federal financial crimes." Kendra let out a wail of absolute despair. She buried her face in her hands, rocking back and forth on the broken glass. She had thought she was helping her brother hide some secret cash. Instead, she had actively participated in a massive federal fraud scheme that had just been handed directly to the Financial Crimes Division on a silver platter. Brenda looked from me to the police officers, completely paralyzed by the cascading disasters. She was witnessing the total, inescapable destruction of her entire bloodline. Her son was a philandering fraudster facing prison. Her daughter was an accessory to money laundering. Her house of cards had not just collapsed, it had incinerated. "Zoe, you cannot do this," Brenda sobbed, falling to her knees on the ruined hardwood floor. "You are destroying my family. We are going to lose everything. Darnell will go to prison for years. Kendra will lose her child. You have the $90 million. You can pay off the fraudulent loan. You can make this go away. We will leave Atlanta. We will never bother you again. Please, show some Christian mercy." I looked down at the woman who had spent 4 years trying to make me feel small in my own home. The woman who had thrown my belongings off a balcony and told me to go die just 48 hours ago. Christian mercy is reserved for those who repent before the hammer falls. "Brenda," I said, my voice completely devoid of any warmth, "I am an accountant. I deal strictly in consequences and balanced ledgers. Your son stole my equity. Your daughter washed the money, and you stood by and cheered while they tried to steal my lottery winnings. The ledger is severely unbalanced, and the collection process has officially begun." Chief Inspector Reynolds tapped his radio, giving a brief code to his dispatch center. "Ms. Henderson," he said, looking down at Kendra, "we have already presented this evidence to the federal magistrate earlier this morning. A judge has signed the emergency injunctions. As of 8 o'clock this morning, every single bank account tied to your Social Security number, Darnell's Social Security number, and any associated business entities, including your nail salon, has been federally frozen." Kendra stopped rocking. She stared at the chief inspector with dead, hollow eyes. "Frozen," she whispered. "Everything. Every single cent," Marcus added, stepping forward to deliver the final legal blow. "Your checking accounts, your savings accounts, Darnell's hidden domestic accounts, and any remaining liquidity you possessed. The federal government has seized it all under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act and federal wire fraud statutes. You cannot buy a cup of coffee. You cannot hire a defense attorney. You are completely and utterly stripped of your financial independence." Brenda let out a low, agonizing moan. The reality of the situation was too massive for her brain to fully process. They had no access to cash. They were hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to a violent loan shark who knew exactly where they slept. And now they were facing federal indictments that carried mandatory minimum sentences spanning decades. They were entirely trapped in a nightmare of their own creation. I turned my back on them and walked toward the kitchen. The air in the house smelled of broken drywall and stale fear. The financial ruin loop was officially locked. There was absolutely no escape route left for them to exploit. The federal government held their bank accounts. Big Mike held their physical safety, and I held the ultimate victory. The final purge was imminent, and I was going to enjoy every single second of sweeping out the trash. I looked out the shattered window, watching the police cruiser idling in my driveway, waiting to haul the rest of my toxic family away. I checked my watch, knowing the locksmiths would be arriving at any moment to seal this absolute triumph. After 4 years of living off my money and sleeping under my roof, my husband and his mother thought they had won a $90 million lottery jackpot. That very same afternoon, she threw my custom designer luggage out of my own second-story window, screaming that they did not need my charity anymore and telling me to go die. I just stood on the manicured lawn of my estate, smiled up at them, and asked if they had bothered to read the name signed on the back of the ticket. "My name is Zoe. I am 33 years old, and I work as a senior forensic accountant for one of the top financial firms in Atlanta. Before you hear how I mathematically and legally dismantled my toxic family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart people who mistook your kindness for weakness." Right on cue, a white commercial van, marked with the logo of Atlanta's premier high-security locksmith service, pulled into my driveway, carefully maneuvering around the police cruiser and the muddy trenches left by the tow trucks. 4 professionals stepped out carrying heavy toolboxes and reinforced steel deadbolts. They did not ask questions. They simply walked up the front steps, stepped over the shattered glass, and began dismantling every single lock on my property. Chief Inspector Reynolds gestured to his uniformed officers. They moved toward Kendra, who was still weeping silently on the floor. It was time for her to join her brother in federal custody. The officers hauled her up by her arms, snapping the cold steel handcuffs around her wrists. Kendra did not fight them. The sheer weight of her impending reality had entirely crushed her spirit. She was escorted out of the brownstone, her head hanging low in absolute disgrace, and placed into the back of the idling police cruiser. Brenda was left sitting completely alone in the center of the devastated living room. Her son was in jail, her daughter was in jail, her church status was obliterated, her bank accounts were frozen, and a violent loan shark was actively hunting her. She looked up at me, her eyes completely devoid of the haughty arrogance she had worn like a crown for the past 4 years. She was a hollow, terrified shell of a woman. "Zoe, where am I supposed to go?" Brenda whispered, her voice trembling violently. "I have no money. I have no car. I do not even have a phone that works anymore. Please, you cannot just throw me out into the street." I walked over to the kitchen pantry, opened the tall wooden door, and reached down to the bottom shelf. I retrieved a brand new box of heavy-duty industrial-strength black trash bags. I walked back into the living room and tossed the box onto the floor right at Brenda's feet. The box landed with a dull, heavy thud. "You have exactly 10 minutes to fill those bags with whatever pathetic belongings you can carry," I instructed, my voice echoing with icy, unyielding authority. "Whatever you leave behind will be incinerated by the biohazard cleanup crew I hired to sanitize this house this afternoon." Brenda stared at the black plastic bags. The bitter poetic irony of the moment washed over her completely. Just 48 hours ago, she had gleefully packed my custom designer clothing into identical black bags and hurled them off my balcony, telling the entire neighborhood to watch my demise. Now she was kneeling on the floor, frantically stuffing her cheap, rumpled clothing into garbage bags, while a locksmith literally changed the locks right in front of her face. She moved with pathetic, desperate speed, sobbing quietly as she shoved sweaters and shoes into the plastic. When she tied off the second bag, she stood up, clutching the plastic rims tightly in her hands. She looked like a vagrant. She began to walk toward the front door, her shoulders slumped in total defeat. She stopped at the threshold, turning back to look at me one final time, hoping for a sliver of the empathy I had foolishly offered her years ago. I stepped forward, towering over her broken frame. "I believe you said you do not need my miserable charity anymore," I stated, quoting her exact words from the balcony. "Get off my property." Brenda flinched as if I had physically struck her. She turned around and dragged her black trash bags down the front steps, shuffling past the locksmiths. I stood in the doorway, watching her trudge slowly down the long paved driveway toward the affluent streets of Cascade Heights. She had absolutely nowhere to go. I reached out, grabbed the heavy brass handle of my splintered oak door, and slammed it shut, sealing her out of my life for the rest of eternity. 1 month later, the sweltering Georgia summer had finally yielded to a crisp, beautiful autumn evening. I sat comfortably on the freshly restored wrought iron balcony of my brownstone. The shattered windows had been replaced with reinforced impact-resistant glass. The muddy trenches in the lawn were gone, replaced by vibrant, newly laid emerald sod. The entire estate felt completely purified. I held a crystal glass of rare vintage Bordeaux wine, gently swirling the dark ruby liquid. The heavy glass doors to my master bedroom were wide open, allowing the cool evening breeze to flow through the suite. Inside my massive flat screen, television was playing the local evening news broadcast. I did not need to look at the screen to know what was happening. I just listened to the anchor's polished voice delivering the final epilogue to my masterclass in retribution. Earlier today in federal court, the news anchor reported, local man Darnell Henderson was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. Henderson pleaded guilty to felony forgery of a state financial instrument and extensive mortgage fraud. His sister, Kendra Henderson, also accepted a plea deal for her role as an accessory to money laundering, resulting in a 3-year sentence in a minimum security facility. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my wine. 5 years in federal prison for Darnell. It was the exact mathematical balance required to offset the 4 years he had stolen from my life. The ledger was officially closed. The broadcast transitioned to a local community update. I turned my head slightly to catch a glimpse of the screen. The news station was running B-roll footage of the Greater Zion Fellowship megachurch, highlighting their upcoming Thanksgiving charity drive. In the background of the footage, completely out of focus, but utterly unmistakable to my trained eye, was Brenda. She was wearing a drab, oversized gray janitorial uniform. She was on her hands and knees in the church lobby, aggressively scrubbing the marble floors with a heavy bristled brush. My network of informants had kept me thoroughly updated on her miserable fate. Stripped of her prestigious choir director title and completely humiliated in front of the congregation, Brenda had begged Pastor Higgins for mercy. The church allowed her to take a minimum wage janitorial position so she could slowly, agonizingly pay off her remaining debts to Big Mike. The loan shark had agreed to a payment plan, provided she handed over 90% of her meager weekly paycheck directly to his enforcers. She was spending her golden years scrubbing toilets to pay off the ghost of a $90 million illusion. I smiled, setting my wine glass down on the small patio table. I picked up my smartphone and opened my secure encrypted banking application. I bypassed the dual-factor authentication and loaded the primary dashboard for the Zoe Z Holdings Trust. The screen illuminated the crisp, cool autumn air. The numbers displayed across the top of the interface were beautiful, absolute, and fiercely protected. $90 million. The funds sat completely untouched, secure in a diversified portfolio of high-yield municipal bonds and offshore trusts. I had not spent a single dime of the lottery payout yet. I did not need to. The real prize was not the money. The real prize was the supreme, unmatched satisfaction of watching the architects of my misery build their own prison cells. I locked the phone screen, plunging the device back into darkness. I picked up a small remote control from the table and pressed the power button. The television inside the master suite clicked off, silencing the news broadcast and returning the estate to a state of absolute perfect tranquility. I leaned back into my plush balcony chair, closed my eyes, and listened to the gentle rustling of the oak trees in the front yard. The air was clean. The house was quiet. I took another sip of the Bordeaux, savoring the rich, complex finish completely enveloped in the ultimate untouchable peace.